Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Galactic Core podcast. I'm your host, Andy, and as always, we're here every single week to discuss all things Star Wars, Marvel, DC, anything nerdy and geeky in between. If this is the first time that you found us, then feel free to follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we're also on TikTok. You can also find the link tree, which will obviously take you across and be able to find our podcasts on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and loads of other places as well. Today, we're going to be talking about all things Super Mario Bros. Movie. The anticipation for it, what the cast were like going in, what did work, what didn't work, and the future of Nintendo movies altogether. But I'm very happy to have a guest that's joining me today to discuss all of this. He is a young, talented filmmaker who has won awards for his short movies. He's also an aspiring writer and producer. He hosts the amazing and successful The Nerdiest Podcast alongside his good friend Jackson. So please welcome to the show, Nic Barrett.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on. It's great. I love talking about the Mario movie. We did our own episode talking about the Mario movie, and honestly, I didn't get to talk about everything I want to talk about, so now I can talk about it all again. So
I'm super excited to have you on, buddy, and to chat about this. I just want to let our audience know a bit more about you, to be fair, and get to know you a little bit better as well. So just tell us, why are you so passionate about films and the filmmaking that you've gotten into?
So I have been watching movies ever since I was a kid. Like, it's just been a part of my life, and I really got into movies through Star Wars, which I can see you're a big Star Wars fan as well. And following that and seeing how different stories can be told through films or I guess movies and films are the same thing. Through movies and shows has just been such an inspiration, and I've always been a creative person, from like laying on the floor and mashing action figures and Legos together and coming up with those really complex things of how Iron Man is fighting Darth Vader and like just having all of that together, and eventually going on to make YouTube content. And then as I was doing that, I thought, well, it'd be really cool to make like movies. So I went to film school, and now I'm a film grad who loves to write and hoping to break into that filmmaking industry one day.
Nice. Sounds good, to be fair. So to you personally then, Nic, what makes a good film? Obviously, lots of different genres, and I'm assuming then lots of different ways to go about making that type of film. But for you, what are the core essentials that really make up a really good film?
I think for me personally, the plot has to be there. I think that's one of the most important parts of having a great movie, which I'll, give my thoughts on the Mario plot in a little bit, because I think it's I have thoughts, but I think one of the most important things is the story. And if your story is not there, then it doesn't really matter if it looks really pretty or if your shots are really good, because yes, it can look really pretty, but it's still a bad movie. Like, a burger can look really nice, but if it tastes bad, it's still a bad burger. So that is an important aspect. I also think music is very important. And I've talked about it on our show a little bit, how older Disney films have the music as more of a essentially dynamic character, and they tell the story through the music. And I think we've kind of moved away from that in going towards more orchestral and just having it be background music as opposed to being actively involved in the plot. So I'd say those two things, is plot and music, are what make a good movie.
Do you think a lot of movies live or die by the writing of it? In terms of, if we're going to use Star Wars as an example, maybe the prequels, a lot of people say that the writing of the dialogue and everything like that maybe wasn't particularly great. So the actors have a harder time sort of getting things across if the writing's bad. Do you think that's something that's equally important as the story itself, or can you get away with bad writing if the overall story is really good?
I think it kind of depends on the situation, but I do think in cases like the prequels, yes, some of those lines were atrocious and like they shouldn't have been in there. But in the case of like Revenge of the Sith, was there some, a little more cringeworthy stuff in there? Yes. but the story overall was really good. And I think it's okay if there's a couple like hit or miss character dialogue choices, because at the end of the day, like, you're never really going to get that perfect. So I would say there's a fine line of those two things, and you have to balance them to make it work.
Nice. So obviously you've got the Nerdiest Podcast that you host alongside your friend Jackson. What led you down the road to doing that podcast together?
So, man, that was a project. I'd always wanted to start a podcast, and I had tried to do it a couple times before, but I never got above like 5 or 6 episodes. And because I didn't really have a direction to go in. It was just like, I'm going to put a microphone in front of me and talk about whatever. And I think a lot of people start a podcast with that mentality of, oh, I can just talk about anything. Well, no, you have to have a direction. You have to have a genre. You have to have a niche, like all of those things. Like our niche is movies and shows. So anything in that umbrella, which even then is a really wide net to cast. So when I was thinking about making a podcast, I was like, okay, I want this one to work. What's going to make it work? And in doing that, I narrowed it down to nerdy topics. It used to be called the Two Nerds Podcast. If you go all the way back to like the first 12 episodes were the Two Nerds Podcast. And that was the whole thing, was just 2 nerds, 3 nerds, 4 nerds, however many, sitting down and having a nerdy conversation. And Jackson wasn't on it until like episode 8. And then we sat down and had like this 2.5 hour conversation that we recorded about Marvel, Star Wars, movie theaters, because that was in the midst of the pandemic and theaters were closed. We were talking like, here's our pre-pandemic theater experiences that we love and we want to get those back. And after that, I was like, I think this is the direction that the show needs to go, is the two of us sitting down and talking about movies and shows, because we're both so deeply passionate about it. And that's how we got to where we are today. And, you know, there's been some experimenting here and there. Like we used to do more gaming episodes, but those didn't do as well. So we kind of just threw that part aside and stick to movies and shows. But every now and then we'll be like, okay, well, let's do a fun crossover episode. Like I'm sure we'll do an episode on Zelda Tears of the Kingdom once that's out, just because it's been such a big deal for the last few years.
Nice. Well, thanks very much for checking out that. Let's chat about the reason why we're here today then, Super Mario Bros. Before we sort of jump into discussing the film itself, when, you know, the film was announced, the cast were announced, the trailer first came out, what were your expectations for this film before you got to see it?
I'll be honest, my expectations were kind of on the floor, because I knew they had done the live action Mario movie and that wasn't very good. And I was like, okay, this probably won't be very good either. Like they have Chris Pratt and Charlie Day and Jack Black and all these like real celebrities doing a Mario movie. That's so weird. And my expectations were really low until we got that first trailer and we saw what it looked like and we heard Jack Black and we heard just a tiny bit of Chris Pratt. And at that point, I was like, you know what? Maybe this is going to be a really good film. Maybe this is like Nintendo actually reined in Illumination and said, okay, your movies look really good. So let's make a really good Mario movie. And I think that's where they ended at.
Nice. So let's talk about that cast then, because I think a lot of people were maybe surprised and at the same time possibly excited and nervous. I think you could probably throw all of those in there for the cast. So let's just remind our listeners of who we had. So Chris Pratt as Mario, Jack Black as Bowser, Anya Taylor-Joy as Peach, Charlie Day as Luigi, Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong, and Keegan-Michael Key as Toad. I think everyone was a little bit nervous about Chris Pratt and wondering perhaps why he'd got it. I think there are probably obviously better choices out there for people that could have played Mario. I think we also probably have to give him a lot of credit that he didn't do the worst job in the world at the end of the day. How are you feeling about the cast and the direction it went in, and who would you have preferred to have been cast, should we say?
I think the cast overall I remember when it got announced, I was kind of iffy about it, but at the end of the day, I could see like, okay, they picked Chris Pratt because they want people to sit down. Like there are some people who will take their kids to see a Chris Pratt movie because Chris Pratt's in the movie, and he kind of has this air about him that's like he was in the Lego Movie 1 and 2. Guardians of the Galaxy is somewhat family friendly. Like his brand is kind of the more family friendly, straightforward movies, and I think they knew that going into it. And everyone else, I think, did a fantastic job. And as you kind of alluded to, Chris Pratt didn't do the worst. And I do agree. I think, and I don't know who off the top of my head, but I think there could have been better choices for Mario. But I think once you actually watch the movie, like there were parts where I heard Mario talking and I honestly forgot that it was Chris Pratt. Like it just didn't cross my mind at all until I actively thought about it again. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Chris Pratt. And then there are some parts where you can hear, oh, yeah, I know exactly who that is. But I think he did a really good job of making the voice his own and not, like, obviously he had that little bit at the beginning where he was imitating the Charles Martinet Mario voice. And everyone was like, oh, so we can do the voice. And something I had been saying on the various times we talked about the movie before release was you have to go into it knowing that this is not the video game Mario. This is a different version of the character. Yes, it's the same character, but in the games, Mario is completely different than he is in the movie. In the movie, he's from Brooklyn, and I guess he's from an Italian family, but he also grew up in Brooklyn. So it would make sense if he had a more Brooklyn accent, which is the direction that they went. And I think that was a good choice on their part to not be like, well, he's from Brooklyn, but he does have an Italian accent. So that I think was great. Jack Black absolutely killed it as Bowser.
Yeah,
I think he
absolutely
was the standout performance, especially his song Peaches.
yeah, peaches, peaches, peaches.
It's such a good song. And the one person I wish we'd heard more from was Charlie Day as Luigi. I feel like he did not get enough screen time, which is why I'm hoping, and I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point, the insane amount of money this movie has made. They're definitely making more. And I hope that a Luigi's Mansion movie is somewhere on their chart of movies to make and really give him the opportunity to just go all out with Luigi.
Was there any thought about being nervous about how well this film would really do? Because let's face it, video game adaptations into film haven't necessarily done the best in sort of turning that into big box office hits sort of through the years. So were you worried at all about whether it would do well, or was this just always a case of Super Mario Bros. And Mario and Luigi are sort of, they transcend generations in the fact that there was never going to be that much of a worry about how well this film would do?
I think I would have been more worried about it if Sonic 2 didn't do as well as it did last year, because that movie exceeded my expectations and exceeded box office.
You love that film as well, don't you?
Yes, that was my favorite movie of 2022. So with this movie, I thought it was going to do good box office wise. I was like, okay, the budget was 100 million. It'll definitely make over that. So they'll get a profit. And that's kind of all that matters at the end of the day. But I didn't think, like, right now it's sitting at $900 million. It is almost at $1 billion, and it hasn't even released in Japan yet. Like, it releases in Japan on Friday, which obviously that's a huge market for this movie because that's where Nintendo is based, is in Japan. So this movie is easily crossing $1 billion. I didn't think it was going to go that far. It's been 4 years, well, 3.5. The last animated movie to cross $1 billion was Frozen 2 in 2019. So the fact that this movie is getting so close and is going to pass that, one, says a lot about the movie theater economy. I think with this much money, you can easily say movie theaters are back. Like, people are going to the movies, taking their family to see the movie. But I do think, to your point, Mario kind of does transcend generations. Like, I went and saw this movie with my mom, and she was like, if you had told me when I was a kid playing Mario on the NES, like the original Mario, that I was going to take my kids to the movie theater to see a Mario movie, I would have laughed at you and thought that was insane. So there is this aspect of parents taking their kids or grandparents taking their grandkids, and because it does transcend generations, you're getting a lot more people in who are like, oh yeah, I know Mario. Because like Mario, in terms of brand recognition, is up there with Mickey Mouse. Like, if not more recognizable than Mickey Mouse. And that's Disney's biggest thing. So yeah, I think I would have been more worried about it, but honestly, I'm just excited to see how high this revenue number goes.
And I think globally it's already gone over $1 billion, isn't it? From what I saw,
it's very close. I think I checked Twitter right before we hopped on, and the last worldwide number I saw was 900 million.
Well, I think it's definitely going to break that, isn't it? So it's going to go into the billion club and cement its success really up there.
The question is if it can cross 1.7 billion and surpass the Lion King live action remake, because that technically is the highest grossing animated film, and I can't stand that because it's not an animated movie. I mean, it is,
yeah,
but
I know what you mean.
It's not.
How many times have you been to see it? I'm correct in saying, didn't you see the Super Mario Bros. Movie like twice in the first 3 days it was out where you were?
Yes, I saw it twice. I haven't had the time to go back and see it a third time, and at this point, I might just wait until the Blu-ray comes out. But yeah, I saw it opening day on Wednesday, and because I knew we were doing a review episode on it, I went into that viewing not taking any notes, just sitting down and enjoying the movie as it was, because it's very different to sit down and try to look at a movie analytically and you don't enjoy it as much. Which is something Jackson told me after we had recorded, is he went and saw it again and said, now that I don't have to take notes or think about it analytically, it was so much more enjoyable. So I did that. I went and saw it the first time, just enjoying it. And then the second time I had my phone and I was like typing notes down so I could be like, oh, I really like this part. I don't want to forget. So yeah, I've seen it twice and I will definitely watch it again in the future at some point.
So when you go in to watch a movie like this, that you know you're a fan of the Mario brand, or if it's Star Wars, Marvel, anything else that sort of you'd be a fan of, do you go in to that first viewing as a critical thinker of it, going, I need it to be like this, or I need it to have been a true adaptation of a comic book, or anything like that? Or do you just go in as a fan that wants to sit back and enjoy the ride that you're on? Because obviously we know a lot of brands like Marvel and Star Wars and the big ones, they're very particular about those hardcore fans, how they go in and watch these types of movies. I like to go in personally. I just want to sit back because I grew up as a comic book nerd. I'm still a comic book nerd, and obviously I'm into a lot of geeky, nerdy things. But I still go in as a blank slate where I want to see that the story they're telling me. I'm not going in going, okay, they've adapted this from this comic book story, so I'm expecting this, and this to be in it. I want to go as a blank slate, sit back and enjoy the ride that they've written and performed on screen for us. How do you go in to see it on those kind of things?
I try to just keep an open mind and enjoy the movie as a standalone. If it's something like a sequel, like Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which comes out, wow, is it next week already?
Yes, next week, yeah.
Going into a movie like that, obviously there are different expectations because it's the third in a trilogy, and your question is, okay, how does this build on and continue the story from the other two? But if it's something like the Mario movie, where I was like, you know what? I just want this to be a good movie. It doesn't have to be a perfect adaptation. It doesn't have to be jam-packed full of references. If it's just Mario is going on his quest to stop Bowser, and obviously it wasn't like Save Princess Peach this time because they changed that, which I think worked. But I just wanted to see a good movie. And if it were something like going into like a Legend of Zelda movie, I would have a lot different expectations because I've always been a Zelda fan over a Mario fan. But this one, I just wanted to see, like, what do they got for me? And obviously they had all these references jam-packed in there. And that, to me, like, I think the strongest part about this movie was the music. And that had me smiling from the very first second to the very last second, because they just jam-packed that soundtrack with Nintendo music, which is what makes Mario games so iconic, is the music. So to answer your question, yes, I usually just go in and try to enjoy the movie as it is, because I know as someone who writes and creates, I don't write it for the critics. I write it for the fan who's going to enjoy it, or just the average watcher who's going to watch it. And I try to think that that's how most creative people think, is they're not writing this movie so that a critic says it's a 99, because at the end of the day that doesn't really matter, because like the Mario movie has a really bad score on Rotten Tomatoes, but the audience score, like the audience loves it. So it's like, okay, which way are we going to go?
Did you watch it in like 2D or 3D? Because I went to see it in 3D, and it was one of those films that I know a lot of people seem to be down on 3D nowadays. So I still go and watch a lot of films in 3D, especially the Marvel films. But this is one again that watched in 3D, and it seemed to really, really work. I know at times in other films like Multiverse of Madness, for example, the 3D can sort of hurt your eyes a little bit, and it still is a little bit weird. But I feel like watching this film in 3D actually works really, really well, because we know it's going to be a beautiful film, and it was in terms of how it looked. And 3D really enhanced that. Is that something you got a chance to witness at all?
No, I saw both in 2D, because my local Regal is pretty standard. It doesn't have any of like the 4DX or the IMAX or any of that. So our options are standard. That's it. So that's what I saw it in.
Nice. You mentioned the music. Let's talk about that a little bit, because you said so many great little Easter eggs and bits of music in there. There were over 130 different Mario songs used throughout this movie. But let's talk about a little different bit of the music, because I think we were always going to be jumping around at the little Easter eggs of music that we find throughout there. But the pop songs, I've got a feeling we may agree a little bit on this. I find that when movies are doing this nowadays, when they're using sort of well-known pop songs in there, it's almost sort of something that Guardians of the Galaxy brought out with their soundtrack. When was it? Back in 2014, I think, when the first movie came out, so nearly 10 years ago. Yeah. And films, every time I hear this now, when they're using sort of well-known pop songs from the 80s and 90s, or even slightly more modern ones, it's just copying that sort of thing that they've done now. I don't think a lot of the pop songs, apart from maybe two, I think the Brooklyn song, when they're in Brooklyn at the start, worked really well. And the classic training montage when they used I Need a Hero. You probably can't begrudge that. But apart from those, do you feel like the pop music really worked in this?
I would say no. And I think using Guardians of the Galaxy as an example, those movies have a reason for doing that. It's because it was such a big part of Peter Quill's character, is that he grew up on Earth in the 80s and 90s, and his mom made him a mixtape. These are the songs that are on that mixtape. So it has a reason for being there. Whereas this felt like they just stuck them in there. I agree. I think the Brooklyn one at the beginning and I Need a Hero, those two work great. I did not need to hear Take on Me while we're on go-karts. Like, I didn't think that really worked. What's frustrating is they have original orchestrated music that they were going to use for that scene that then got taken out, and Take on Me got put in. So it's not like that was the intention from the beginning. They went ahead and made the music for it. And actually, an interview came out, I think either this week or last week, where someone who worked on the music apparently had to fight to use the Superstar theme at the end, because they wanted to put another pop song there instead of using the Superstar theme. And it's like, the Superstar theme that's been in every Mario game and every Mario Kart game, like, you don't think that's iconic enough to use? Which thankfully they did, and that was amazing. I definitely would have looked at that moment a lot differently if it was another pop song. But I do think those two towards the beginning and anything after that just didn't work, and I didn't like it.
Yeah, I agree, to be fair. I think there wasn't a need to have the pop songs in there when you've got so much iconic music, and even a chance to throw in a bit of original music in there as well. There's no need to sort of drag those things through. But yeah, the Take On Me one, as much as that is a cracking 80s tune, I don't see the reason for it to be in that particular part of it. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. The plot itself, though, let's chat about that. I mean, Odyssey the game seemed to be the biggest influence on this movie itself. I think there was more probably points from the Odyssey game in terms of how the movie looked and the style of it had more of an influence than anything else. So that leading on to obviously the plot that is obviously very similar to every Mario game, and the fact that, you know, normally obviously we see Princess Peach has been snatched and Mario is going to go off to try and save her from Bowser. Here, obviously, a little bit different. How do you feel about the plot? Was it too simple, or was it because this is a family film that's designed to be for kids and adults who love the franchise? It was just something that was needed to be tweaked from what the original games tend to be.
So I think the plot and my biggest takeaway coming out of my second viewing was that it absolutely could have used another 10 or 15 minutes. Just because there was some stuff that felt really rushed that could have easily been fixed if they had an extra 10 or 15 pages on that script. And I think it's okay that the plot is simplistic, because the plot in Mario games is pretty simplistic. Mario is with Luigi and Peach, and then Bowser does something bad, and now we got to go stop Bowser. And once we stop Bowser, yay, we win. Like, that's kind of the whole premise. It's not like a Zelda game, which has a very deep and fleshed out story that you play throughout the game. Mario's just not like that. Even if you pull out something like Odyssey or Galaxy, like, they're just not very story heavy games. They're more gameplay over the story. So I think the story worked. And I think not having Peach get kidnapped was okay, because they didn't do that in 3D World, and Peach was a part of the playable cast in that game. Like, Bowser kidnapped someone else and used someone else's like evil device. And I think even though Bowser didn't directly capture Luigi, and that was more because they got separated and he just happened to land in that section of, you know, the world where Bowser controls, and then he got captured from there. And the whole thing is like, okay, well, we got to save Luigi, which I think is okay. But I also think they could have done more with that aspect. Like, he didn't need to be in a cage the entire time. They could have reworked that a little bit. Like, oh, he's staging a jailbreak and now he's leading everybody out of here. I think that aspect of it could have been reworked. But I would argue the best part of the film, pacing wise, is before they go to the Mushroom Kingdom. Everything up until that point feels very natural. Like, oh, here's the introduction to our villain. Here's the setup for what the villain's going to do. What is he going to do with this superstar? We all know what a superstar does. Like, they don't need to explain, okay, well, a superstar makes you invincible for a certain amount of time and gives you all these powers. No, we already know. And I think they did apply that premise to a lot of the plot. Like, they didn't need to explain the fire flower or the mini mushroom or the power-up boxes themselves. Like, Peach literally said, oh, these boxes give us items that give us powers. That was it. That's all we need to know, because we, the audience, know what happens when you get an item from an item box. So there's some stuff like that I think is okay. And the beginning where they're like, oh, we're plumbers in Brooklyn, we're trying to get our first job. Oh, we got our first job, it didn't go very well. Here's the inciting incident that could, you know, really bring us fame and fortune. And then once they get sucked into that warp pipe is when the plot goes from 0 to 100. And it felt like it was just Mario's here, Mario's there, Mario's here, Mario's there, and now we're at the end of the movie. And it's over. And I didn't really care for that, because it felt like, oh, if this movie was an extra half hour, we could have gotten that fleshed out a little bit more.
Do you think they really needed to do the whole bit at the beginning with them in Brooklyn? Because that, to me, seemed like more of a callback to the '93 live action film. Or do you think they could have really just started off with the fact that they were already in, you know, the Mushroom Kingdom, or in, you know, in that sort of area, as opposed to having to do this whole thing of we're in the real world, they're in a separate world, and getting there via the pipes, etc.?
I think because this is a first movie, it was definitely needed, because that's how the games usually, like, the first game starts is Mario ends up, oh, how does he get to the Mushroom Kingdom? We don't really know, but let's fill in that gap. Like, he's a plumber from Brooklyn. Okay, so we got that. And I think it works because this is like essentially an origin story movie. And I think in the future, like in a sequel or other spin-off movies, they don't need that. And we can just start with, okay, if you haven't seen the first one, nah, well, you kind of know how a Mario game works anyway, so we'll just throw you back into it.
By the way, I think in the opening bit, probably the scenes with the dog, I think were just absolute comedic genius.
Yes.
To be fair, I was laughing so much at those particular bits. Just the eyebrow looks, when he walks in and just shuts the door behind him when they're in the bathroom and going off here. I love the fact that they put that in, because sometimes I think it's important that people need to remember this was a family film. It's not
Right.
directly for adults or older adults, maybe like myself, that grew up with Mario in the sort of late 80s and 90s. And it's not necessarily just for kids who are coming into it now. It's for kids and adults, so they need that sort of mix. And do you think putting stuff in there like that is more for the adults because it's something that maybe because it's all about like the facial looks and the complexion that the dog's giving off to them, that's more for someone that's a bit older is going to pick up on, rather than maybe sort of like 5 to 10-year-olds that are in there?
Yeah, I think keeping that in mind, that this is a family movie. It is not, hey, you who's played Mario since, you were 5 years old, like, this is the movie for you. Yes, obviously you can go in and enjoy the movie, but when I was sitting in the theater, every kid in that theater was laughing and like just enjoying themselves and getting everything out of the movie that I think Illumination and Nintendo wanted them to get out of that movie. They were laughing. They were scared when they were supposed to be scared. They were cheering when they were supposed to be cheering. Like, and especially the bit with the dog, like, yes, kids are going to find that hilarious. And I think that has a lot to do with how animation portrays animals, especially Illumination, given that they've done 2 Secret Life of Pets movies. That felt very much out of one of those films. And I think it worked because it made great use of the physical space of like, oh, the shower's filling up, so it's rising and it's going to get over. And, oh, the sink is broken, so now all this water is coming out. And those things, I think that was good. I think it was good that they had that in there. And something that I think we have to address, and this might go back to the pacing issue, is people's attention spans are so much lower now, and they have to keep it moving because we're in the era of like TikTok, where I don't like this video, next. I don't like this video, next. You instantly can have gratification. So they have to keep the movie moving or you're going to get bored. And when your primary audience is like kids, you got to keep it moving.
Yeah, that's fair. Just before I talk about something else that's comedic about this film, just a little Easter egg, which I absolutely loved, because obviously there were hundreds of Easter eggs in this film. But on the back of the Mario van, or the Super Mario Bros. Van, it had a website and a phone number. Did you know that they're real? That's a real website, a real phone number that you can actually call. I love that fact so much, that you can actually go onto their website and have a look at it. And it's amazing that they have thought so hard, because I was watching a YouTube video of obviously all the little Easter eggs and everything from it. And I think in like Toad Town, they had like a vintage store, and they picked out something like 30 Easter eggs just from looking in this store as they're walking past it. So the attention to detail that they put in to make sure that throughout the entire movie and almost everything, there is some Easter egg to some previous game or some iteration of Super Mario Bros. Along the way.
Yeah, I think it definitely shows that, one, everyone from Illumination who worked on this movie loves Nintendo. That comes through in every frame of this movie. They had so many amazingly passionate people who worked on this movie. And I think it also helps that Nintendo was kind of like a helicopter parent to make sure that Illumination did what they wanted to do. But what's so interesting is, as I look at and read more interviews, it doesn't seem like they helicopter parented this movie. It seems like Illumination knew what Nintendo wanted from this movie, and they weren't like, well, you see, we've made Despicable Me, and you know what's in those movies that's funny? Fart jokes. There was not a single fart joke in this movie, and I think that was for the better, because I don't think they work comedically outside of something like Despicable Me with the fart gun. Like, oh, that's funny. So I think having that level of, we know what you want and just that partnership really worked together because they did jam pack this movie with references. Like, I didn't catch it on my first go, but if you look in Mario's room when he's sitting there playing on the NES and he's playing Kid Icarus, which is 2 references in and of itself, he also has an R-Wing from Star Fox on top of the TV. So that's 3 references in that one scene. Not to mention the various posters on the background. Like I think he has an F-Zero poster on his wall. So just like the way they're able to just put all of that in one frame and it not be an overtly in your face, like, hey, look, you see, we put Star Fox in this movie. Like, it's just there. And it encourages you to go back and watch it 3, 4, 5, 6 times to see, okay, I've already gotten this scene. Let's look at this one. And then you miss it. Because when you're in the theater, you can't rewind.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot more Easter eggs will come out once we have the Blu-ray and people can pause and go back and rewind and take a lot more time to look at it. And that's when I honestly think there are references people haven't even found yet.
Oh yeah, there's going to be a lot more that come out. And I think that's one of the things I love about having a franchise like this is the amount of things they can do like that. In terms of the fact that they can put all these things in the background and it's not taking your attention completely away from what's going on there and what the characters are saying. So the fact that they can put all these things there and we're going to pick them up and it's going to keep you going back to watch it as well, just to pick out these things. And I think is a great play and it's something that I'm really happy that they get to do. But speaking of comedic relief, for me, one of the best sort of comedic parts of the entire film, Luma Lee.
Yes.
I think this was more for the adults, really, because it was dark.
It was really dark humor, and I loved that so much. When Kamek comes in and is like, "We're all gonna, we're gonna sacrifice all of you," and the Luma's like, "Yes, finally, mercy." Like, it was just so unhinged, and I've never seen Illumination do a character like that before. I've never even seen Disney do a character like this before, where it's just like it leans into the fact that it is dark and kids will kind of be like, oh, haha, the funny talking star said something and everyone like has an adverse reaction of what you think. But then the adults are like, man, that's dark and depressing, but it's kind of funny at the same time.
To me, it was, laughing at that all over, to be fair. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And it's just something I wanted to mention because I thought, even if it was more for the adults, because the kids aren't necessarily going to get the darkness of those comments, completely unexpected and a brilliant move to put it in there. Like you said, I don't expect maybe Nintendo or Illumination to have gone that dark, and I can't help but wondering if there were other bits that they cut out. Or if there was more from Luma Lee that they went, maybe this is pushing it a little bit on the boundary, so we're just going to leave it where it is for now. But in terms of everything else, you said that trying to cram a lot into this movie, so we get to see a lot of the different kingdoms, and obviously we get to see all the different tubes and stuff that were going up to Princess Peach's castle. And the fact that we seeing things like the Jungle Kingdom, they called it, obviously with the Kongs. And the carts, building the carts, and then obviously going on to Rainbow Road. Do you think they were trying to put too much into this? Because it's obviously they want to make a universe out of this. They want to do more of these films. They want to world build in a way, in the way that obviously Marvel have done. And they want to have more to come. So do you think maybe they were trying to cram a bit too much into this to go, look, this is what we've got from the original Mario's, and if we cram it all in now, then we can relax a bit later on because we've seen it. I think maybe a good point for me on this was the fact that the post-credit scene, we get to see Yoshi being hatched. And they had a random scene in it where we saw like a herd of Yoshis running about.
Right.
That maybe necessarily wasn't needed to be in there, but they were like going, look at all these things that are in this universe. There's like nods to everything, but was it a bit too much, do you think?
I think they definitely could have toned stuff back, and I know exactly why they did what they did. Because Nintendo, this movie started production in like 2015, I think. So it started production pre-Nintendo Switch. We're now in a post-Nintendo Switch era where their highest selling game is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So they think, okay, 40 million people bought Mario Kart. They like Mario Kart, so let's put Mario Kart in this movie. I would probably say Mario Kart was not in this movie until like 2017 or 2018. I think they went back and reworked it and put Mario Kart in there, and that's why it took so long. I think the explosiveness of how well the Switch has done definitely impacted this game. Like, I think Bowser wears his like top hat from Odyssey. That definitely was not in the game or not in the movie until after Odyssey came out. There's no way they had that ready to go. So I think seeing how well certain things on the Switch have done, they then tweaked the movie to include those things to try to get that audience, or vice versa, where you don't have a Switch and you see all of these things and you're like, man, I really want to play a Mario game. Oh, I got Odyssey right there. Oh, I want to play a Mario Kart game. Got a Mario Kart game right there. The only thing they don't have is Donkey Kong, which I'm sure there's a Donkey Kong game on the way sometime. But I do think they did try to put a lot in here. Like, I didn't think we were going to see the cat bell. I thought that was, that's way too recent. Like, they're going to stick to the more traditional items like the fire flower and the ice flower and the star. Like, they're going to keep it very basic. No, we got the mini mushroom. We got the cat shine, like, or the cat bell. Like, I think it's very interesting that they did put those things in there. And again, I think it's because the Switch has done so well. They want to be able to have that brand synergy while also trying to set up that universe. And I would argue, I don't think they're going to do their cinematic universe in the same way that Marvel did, where everything is connected. I think there'll be a Mario 2, a Donkey Kong movie, a Luigi's Mansion, and those will all be connected together. But if they ever do like Metroid or Zelda or Animal Crossing, like, I think those will all be their own things. Where like Zelda's not necessarily connected to Mario, but they're all under the same Nintendo brand of movies, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So then in terms of the actual characters themselves, who is your absolute favourite? Who do you think they need a bit more work on? For example, do you think they did Luigi a bit dirty in this film?
Absolutely.
In terms of... Tell me more. Tell me more about Luigi.
Charlie Day, I mean, I'm a big Chris Pratt fan. I've always been a huge Chris Pratt fan, and I defended his Mario voice from the moment we heard it. Everyone was like, it's bad. And I'm like, we just haven't heard enough of it yet. Like, he said 2 lines. You guys haven't heard anything. And just, it feels so nice to see this switch up on the internet when everyone's like, oh, well, it actually wasn't that bad. And I'm like, it's almost like this is what I've been saying since day one. But going into it, aside from Chris Pratt, I was really excited to see Charlie Day as Luigi, because that felt like a perfect, like just a lightning in a bottle type role. And I'm kind of sad that he didn't get a lot. Like, for a movie called the Super Mario Bros. Movie, it was really just a Mario movie where Luigi spent most of his time in a cage off screen. Like, he did have that one good scene with Bowser where he's getting interrogated, and I think Charlie Day did an incredible job there. But I do wish they gave him more to do, because even once he gets out of the cage, he just kind of stands there while Mario does all the stuff, and he doesn't really come in again until the very end, where he holds up the sewer grate to stop the fire. And then obviously they both get the superstar, which is not how stars work. Like, for a movie that was so detail oriented and like every attention to detail, that's the one rule you want to break. Like, I don't know, but it was a cool scene nonetheless, and I can overlook it. But I do wish he got to do more, which is why I'm hoping they do a Luigi's Mansion. Charlie Day has already said he is down to do a Luigi's Mansion movie, and the lore's there because King Boo was at Bowser's wedding. So like, the lore is there. You just have to make the movie and do it. And I think it would do really good, because people love Charlie Day, and people clearly really loved the Mario movie. So I think any kind of sequel or spin-off is going to do really good.
Agreed, to be fair. Donkey Kong. Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. I don't know whether this is a controversial opinion coming from myself. I felt like, in terms of the voice anyway, Seth Rogen did the bare minimum he needed to, in terms of getting a voice across. in terms of then the character itself, how it was represented in the film, how are you feeling about him?
I think for a character that's never really had character, I think they did a decent job of making him like, oh yeah, he's a talking monkey who likes to fight and he smashes barrels together, but he's also got dancing pecs. Like they definitely added a lot of Seth Rogen into the character, which means in the future those two will be inseparable. You won't be able to have a Donkey Kong without Seth Rogen in any type of movie. Games are obviously very different. And I kind of wish they, like, I thought Seth Rogen was okay. It did feel a little off-putting when he did his laugh, though, because it's like, that's so characteristically Seth Rogen. And I can't stand the people who are like, oh yeah, Seth Rogen did such a good job as Donkey Kong, but Chris Pratt, he really phoned it in. He did the bare minimum. And I'm like, but Seth Rogen is just talking into the microphone. Like he's just reading his lines. At least Chris Pratt put a Brooklyn voice or a Brooklyn accent on his voice. Seth Rogen's doing the bare minimum. And in a very similar vein, Fred Armisen as Cranky Kong, I did not like that. He sounded like he was phoning it in. And I just think they could have done a lot better because it wasn't Fred Armisen's best role either.
No, definitely
He
not.
just played this weirdly nasally old dude who didn't even really sound that old. And yeah, I think they did a great casting everywhere else, but those two felt like kind of the bottom of the barrel, pun intended, I guess.
Do you feel hard done by that they seem to basically erase Donkey Kong Jr. Out of it? Because obviously Donkey, for those that maybe not know, Donkey Kong is the grandson in the games from Cranky Kong, and obviously Donkey Kong Jr. is the son, and they basically wiped that out and said that Donkey Kong was Cranky Kong's son. Do you feel like we should have had Donkey Kong Jr. in there somewhere? Or was it not needed, really?
I don't think it was needed. I think because it's a movie and they're reestablishing a different universe, I think it's okay. If they were trying to do a one-to-one adaptation, then I think it would feel a little out of place. But for someone like me who didn't know that prior to this podcast, I think it worked out okay.
And just a little random fact I always like to throw into little things. You know the line, "It's on like Donkey Kong." That originally came from an Ice Cube song in the 90s, and then Nintendo went and trademarked it, and obviously now use it for all their merchandise. So we can thank Ice Cube for that line, technically.
Wow.
Just a nice little random fact I like to throw in every now and again. So we've covered sort of those guys. What about Peach then? Let's have a quick chat about Peach, because I think you guys had a very interesting chat on your podcast about her and how she was sort of represented. Comes across obviously as a very, very strong female character. Doesn't really have any other females to talk to or identify with throughout the entire film. But if I can just sort of paraphrase what you guys said on your podcast, I can't remember if it was Jackson or the guest that you had on, sort of said that she was a bit like Rey Skywalker in terms of she is immediate there. She's strong. She's willful. She's almost automatically good at everything. When she's doing the training course with Mario, she obviously does it perfectly, and she was sort of trying to make him feel better by going, "Oh, when I arrived, I was terrible at it too." And she's like, "No, actually, I got it right first time. I'm absolutely spot on at it." Do you thought this was the right move for her kind of character? Because she's still kick-ass in the games, and she's still a strong character in that one. Do you think this is the kind of film, though, where they've sort of just made her good at everything and little girls can look up to her and go, "This is a great character for me to be able to look up to as sort of the only female in this game"?
I think Peach left a lot to be desired. And I think, honestly, I think it's great. We need more strong female characters in movies and shows, but this is not, like, it's a step in the right direction, but it's almost too far because yes, she is instantly good at everything. We don't get to see any of her struggle because that is what makes characters feel so real, is like, and our guest AJ from Genre Geeks brought it up, where we're in this apologetic phase where women haven't exactly been treated super great in movies, so now we're trying to overcompensate for that by making them the best at everything, and I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I think if you really leaned into the bit where Peach was like, yeah, I didn't get it on the first try either. Like, I actually really struggled. That is such an easy, like, if you took the, oh yeah, of course I did it first try. If you took that out, that scene would have been so different and it would have been so much better, because it did show that yes, she did work for it. And it's not just, oh, because she's a girl, she's good at everything. Like, no, girls still have to work to be good at things. It's not an instantly good. And that's part of like my biggest issue with Rey, is that Rey kind of got everything handed to her and then was instantly good at it. And it really just tore apart someone like Luke, who had to work and struggle and suffer to get to the point where he was at. And it undercuts everything about any other character when you have one who does just be instantly good at everything. I think it's okay that she's a strong female character. She's been that way in the games before. Like in Mario Odyssey, she goes off without you or Bowser. Like, she just leaves you both. And I'm like, you know what? Good for you. They both kind of suck, honestly. Or in 3D World, she's there. She's a part of the game. And even if she were to be the damsel in distress of this movie, that doesn't mean she's instantly a weak female character. Like, you see, when Bowser was like, will you marry me? She's like, no. He was like, okay, fine, then I'll torture the toads. And she's like, okay, hold on. Okay, well, don't hurt my toads. Like, that speaks a lot about her character, that she would sacrifice an aspect of herself to protect other people. That is a very good quality to have. And just because it leans into, well, now she's the damsel in distress. No, she wasn't. She was not the damsel in distress there. Yes, Mario did come and save the day, but he kind of saved everyone. So I do think her character is a step in the right direction, and I hope they flesh this out in future movies. And I hope in future movies we get characters like Daisy and Rosalina. So Peach does have some other female characters. I didn't realize that until we got to the end of the movie. Like, oh, there's literally no other female character here at all. Like, the only other female character in the movie is like Mario's mom and his aunt. Like, that's it. And I wish there was a nod somewhere to Daisy or a nod somewhere to Rosalina. Like, obviously the Lumily is there, so we know Lumas exist, which would imply that Rosalina exists. So I wish they hinted or alluded to that so that there was another female character, because I think it just needed to be a part of the movie.
That's fair. Do you think Rosalina would have made a better post-credit scene than Yoshi?
Oh, absolutely. Especially because, and I know you mentioned it earlier, we had already seen Yoshi's. This was not like a new big thing. Like, oh, it's the Yoshi, the green one, who, is like the iconic Yoshi. Okay, that's cool. We already know Yoshi's exist, though. So that post-credit scene kind of felt wasted. Of like, okay, so you're going to bring Yoshi in the next movie? Like, I don't know, what do you mean? It would have been much better if it was a setup for someone like Rosalina, or if you wanted to show, like, if they really want to go into the Mario lore, go into Sarasaland, where Daisy's at. Like, tease that. I kind of like, that would have been such an easy thing to tease on that giant map that they had. Just put another kingdom there and have someone be like, what if we went there? And they're like, no, we have bad blood with that kingdom. There you go. There's your second movie right there.
Yeah.
Is you've already established we have bad blood with this kingdom, so we're going to this one instead. So in the second movie, let's explore that one. And who's there? Oh, it's Daisy. And they have bad blood because, I don't know, you can make something up. But I do think that post-credit scene would have been much better spent on, like, Lumily reuniting with Rosalina and her being like, oh, how'd you get all the way out here? And he's like, well, I got captured by this guy, Bowser. And this guy, Mario, saved the day. And she's like, oh, okay, so there's this guy, Mario, who's here now. And then, bam, now you've set up another movie. So what I don't want them to do this is in a sequel. I don't want them to cram Daisy and Rosalina in at the same time. I think they could be the focal point of their own movies. I don't think you need to bring them in at the same time. I do think they should both be brought in at some point, but not at the same time, because those are two major characters. Kind of like how, and I guess brief spoilers for Sonic the Hedgehog, the movies, is in the first movie, it was Sonic and Eggman. In the second movie, it was Tails and Knuckles. And now in the third movie, it's Shadow the Hedgehog. They did not bring all those characters together in one movie. Yeah. It took them 3 movies to get there. And that felt great because it didn't feel like they were just smashing everything together.
Yeah. Do you think even as a post-credit scene, having, say, Wario and Waluigi would have been better than what we got? I love Yoshi, to be fair. I always pick him as a character when I'm playing on Super Mario Kart and stuff like that. But I still feel like we've been severely let down by that post-credit scene. You sit to the end of the film through all those credits and you get to see an egg crack. So even someone like, do you think, like, do you want to see like Wario and those kind of characters come into it? Or
absolutely.
are we just trying to extend it too far out because we love these characters so much?
I think at some point these movies will have the entire like Mario Party roster, which is Mario, Luigi, Yoshi, Peach, Rosalina, Daisy. Like, eventually we'll have all those characters in one place, which I think it would be really fun if they did like a Super Mario Party movie. I think there's a concept there, like Bowser gets out and invites all of them to this island to compete for a superstar. Like, but I do feel like that post-credit scene was wasted. And I think I love Chris Pratt, but I do feel like he falsely hyped up the post-credit scene because he was like, oh, there's a post-credit scene, you want to stay, and it teases, the future of this, what the cinematic universe could look like. And everyone's minds instantly go to, oh my gosh, it's Rosalina. Oh my gosh, it's Wario and Waluigi, and it's just Yoshi, which we had already seen in the movie. So it's like, well, I feel like I've been lied to, even though he never explicitly said what the post-credit scene was. Just the fact that the tagline after, this is what a future cinematic universe could be, and then it being that, I did feel let down that I sat all the way through the credits of being like, oh, and all I get is an egg crack and I hear, Yoshi sound.mp4 or mp3 play, and that's it. And like, really? You could have had some, like, you didn't even need to get voice actors for Wario and Waluigi. You could have used Charles Martinet as a stand-in and teased that, oh, they found the pipe. Like, it was such a simple thing, and I think they could have easily changed that.
Makes me wonder if maybe they had a different post-credit scene originally, because there seems to be a thing in some recent series that I've watched as well, where it comes up to the finale and someone from the team is tweeted out, this particular thing is going to blow your mind, and then they seem to change it in between the time of when they made that tweet and when the episode or the film goes out. So I wonder, I just get that nagging feeling that maybe there'd been a slightly different post-credit scene and they decided to change it as to think, oh, maybe we'll keep those characters back for more of a surprise in the next film or something like that. Do you get that feeling at all? Like, sometimes it just sets that when someone says something like that online, they go, yep, this is going to be mind-blowing. And then you look at it and go, well, that wasn't worth sitting through 7 minutes of credits.
Yeah, I almost wonder if they didn't want to do something as big as Rosalina or Wario and Waluigi, because I wonder if they didn't have confidence in this movie. Like, I think they were confident about how it was going to do, but I don't know if they expected it to get $1 billion. Like, I don't think they expected it to go that far. So, once again, to use Sonic as an example, because it's kind of, aside from Mario, is like the golden example of video game movies, is not even the post-credit scene of Sonic. The ending of the first Sonic movie is, oh, Tails is here. Now you've set up your second movie, and everyone's really excited. And then instantly after that movie came out, they said, all right, we've already greenlit a second one. And you're like, whoa, that's crazy. And then the post-credit scene of Sonic 2 is Shadow the Hedgehog. I remember sitting in the movie theater. People lost their freaking minds when Shadow showed up, because that is such a big deal. And I think your post-credit scene directly ties to your confidence in getting another movie. I think that's why they went with something so safe like Yoshi. Like, yes, you've already seen Yoshi, and that just means that this, like, main Yoshi could be in another movie if we ever make another movie. So not to say they weren't confident, but I think there was just like a little bit of hesitation. And I think a second movie could have a much better post-credit scene, because now they're like, okay, the first movie has paid for like 4 Mario movies down the line, and we still make a profit. So it's okay if one of them doesn't do as well. Because I think the net take home of Nintendo, I think the budget was like 100 to 150 million. If they make $1 billion, that's $850 million they get to take home for, I don't want to say phoning it in, but having like a bare bones plot that, yes, it worked and yes, it was good, but could have been better, and a celebrity voice cast and 55% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, $1 billion. Could you imagine the kind of money that a Mario movie that has like a high 90 on Rotten Tomatoes with the critics and the audience score, that could really destroy the box office? So I think going forward, they now know, okay, this works, because their only frame of reference for Nintendo movies was the really bad 1993 live action movie. And I think there was a lot of hesitancy there of like, oh, do we want to do this again? Like, do we really want to step into the film department and like the show department? And I think this movie doing really well has told them movies are profitable, do movies, and I think eventually they'll branch into a show. I don't know like where they'll put it. I don't know if it'll be a Netflix exclusive or HBO or whatever, but I think at some point in the future they'll say, okay, let's branch into a show. And I think they're probably going to end up following Sonic's example of, we did 2 movies, now we have a show and a 3rd movie. And I think Nintendo's going to kind of follow in that footsteps, because they can see, okay, this is what is working and what's successful.
So if that would be the case of, they say, we're going to do a few movies, get this sort of universe expanded a bit, and then they decide to branch off into a show. Let's just say they do 3 movies to world build and then go into a series. Tell me your dream lineup for those 3 films and then going into a series. If Nintendo give you a check, Nick, and go, we're putting you in charge of just writing the next universe for these 3 films and then branching into the TV series, what's your dream? What would your dream lineup be in those?
All right. Well, 3 movies. So are we saying 3 movies, including the one that's out right now?
Let's just say on top of what we've had.
Okay. So obviously a sequel to the Mario movie. You don't make $1 billion and not do a direct sequel to what made you $1 billion. I think they also do a Luigi's Mansion, give Charlie Day his spinoff. And then if you want to get outside of the Mario sphere, I think you do. I think you might be able to get away with an Animal Crossing movie, because that game did really well on Switch. Now, you could argue the pandemic had a lot to do with that, because it came out right as everything was shutting down, and it was the only game out, and it was just kind of a perfect storm, and maybe it wouldn't have done so well if it wasn't in that situation. But I do think an Animal Crossing movie in the same vein of Mario could be a very family-friendly movie that you take your kids to go see, because there are a lot of kids who play Animal Crossing, and yes, it's a little bit newer than Mario. I think it could work. And then their show, I think they go with Zelda. I don't think you could confine a Zelda story to a movie. You probably could, but it'd need to be 2 hours at the minimum. And even then, you're pushing it for an animated movie. So I think Zelda's your show, because it's a big enough IP that you could get people, if it's an HBO Max exclusive, people will sign up to HBO Max to watch a Zelda show. The IP is big enough, and I think they have to start with those kind of core IP. And I think if you wanted to switch out Animal Crossing for something like Splatoon or Metroid, you absolutely could. But I also feel like those 2 are a little bit too niche to be a movie. And yeah, if they handed me a check, I'd say, all right, that's what we're doing.
What about Kirby? Do you think Kirby would translate well enough into an animated film?
I do. I think Kirby, actually, yeah, you know what? I'll swap out Animal Crossing for Kirby. I think Kirby would be a great movie to be done by Illumination. And I mean, this might be a controversial opinion. I don't want Illumination to touch anything Zelda related. Not to put any disrespect on Illumination. Their movies look great. I just think Zelda has a completely different style to what they do. And I think if you want to keep it in the Universal realm, I think you hand it off to DreamWorks and let DreamWorks do a Zelda movie, because they did a phenomenal job with the recent Puss in Boots movie. And I think if you get a Zelda movie with that kind of art style, the way it blended 3D and 2D together, that would be one of the best movies ever made. But yes, I do think Kirby would translate really well because it does have that very family friendly, and a lot of Nintendo brands are very family friendly that appeal to a broad audience.
Fair enough. So rounding back off then, I'll sort of chat about Super Mario Bros. Altogether. What were your absolute favourite moments of this film? What was it that you loved the most about it?
I would say favorite moment, if I had to nail it down to one, would probably be the superstar at the end. That just filled me with so much glee, and I was just so excited, especially with the way the music came in. I was like, man. Some other standout stuff would be going on Rainbow Road. The way they tied the music into that too, even though I knew from the trailer that's what was happening, but sitting in the theater, hearing the Rainbow Road music that I've heard my entire life. I've played Mario Kart for my entire life. Rainbow Road is one of my favorite tracks. And hearing that music come in while seeing Rainbow Road with like all the carts was just so amazing. And as a Nintendo fan and even as a Mario fan, like the first game I ever remember playing is New Super Mario Bros. Wii on the Wii. And I just felt as a Mario fan, I was so satisfied with this movie, even though I have like nitpicky issues like, oh, Peach's character could have been better. The movie could have been longer. I left the theater feeling so happy and enjoying the soundtrack and just enjoying the movie overall that I think it kind of all, at the end of the day, gave me exactly what I was expecting from this movie.
And what about the film would you like to have seen improved upon or done slightly differently? Because it's by no means a perfect film. I think you go into it and you can look at it with a slightly critical eye, but at the end of the day, it's one of those films that you still come out of smiling your head off about. But what were maybe the little things in there that you personally just would have liked to have changed?
Well, like I previously mentioned, I think Peach's character could use a little work. I do think I think it all comes back to that the pacing needed to be just bumped out, like even 10 to 15 minutes. And I know it's a kids movie and kids' attention spans are short. But animated movies have been close to 2 hours or at 2 hours. Like, I know it's going to be completely different, but I recently went and saw Suzume, which is Makoto Shinkai's new anime film, and that was 2 hours and 3 minutes, and it honestly did not feel like 2 hours. It felt like an hour and a half, and I was in and out, and because the pacing was so, like, it was handled so well, it didn't feel like 2 hours. So I almost wonder if there's a 2 hour cut of this movie out there that felt really long, and they just said, okay, you know what? Let's chop off a half hour and just kind of smush everything together, and it'll work. So I do hope that future movies give Peach a gal pal. Like, just give her another girl to talk to, because there's no one else for her to talk to. And I think one of the most important things, and this will come back to writing, is your character dynamics. Is you need someone of the same gender for your character to bounce off of. Like, there are great, bro relationships, and that's great because the two guys can bounce off of each other. Guys and girls don't bounce off each other the same way. And I think putting in another female character for Peach to bounce off of would be really great, which is why I bring up Rosalina or Daisy. Preferably Daisy, because I do feel like their back and forth relationship would be really interesting. So yeah, I think it comes back to, I want to see better pacing, and I want to see better bounce off character relationships.
That's fair. And then your final sort of remark about this film, what was your absolute top favourite little moment that happened in this film, and then finally, what do you give this score out of 10? What do you score this film out of 10?
Favorite little moment. I'm trying to think. It's not little by any means, but probably Jack Black singing Peaches.
Oh,
I think that is just, it's just such, it's so out there, and it's really just Jack Black being Jack Black.
Yeah.
And that's great. What I would give this out of 10, probably an 8.5, because it's a really solid video game adaptation, and I would give it a 9.5, but I do feel like those issues that I mentioned before keep it from getting it that like very close to 10 out of 10. Like, I pretty sure I gave Sonic 2 a 9.5. So Mario's like a full step underneath that. So it was a great start, and they have plenty of room to grow.
Nice. And did you know that that Peaches song technically falls into the criteria that could have it nominated for Best Song at the Oscars?
I want it to be nominated, and I want it to win.
Imagine the bedlam that would happen if that song won Best Oscar for Best Song. That would be incredible. Yeah. I think is there anything else that you would like to say about the film at all? I think we've covered everything pretty well, to be fair.
I don't think so. I'm just sitting here waiting for the day I see the tweet that it's crossed $1 billion, which is going to come very soon. I think. Yeah. I'm interested to see if it'll cross $1 billion before or after it releases in Japan. And fun fact is, it's releasing in Japan on April 28th, which is, I'm pretty sure on April 29th starts their Golden Week, which is like their transition from spring to summer, if I remember correctly. And kids are out of school, and people, I don't know if they're off work, but they have reduced work hours, which means they'll be able to go out and see this movie. And I think them waiting to release it for so long was absolutely intentional, to time it with that week specifically. Kind of like how in the US, we wait to release movies until Memorial Day or Labor Day or Christmas or Thanksgiving. Like, you wait until around holidays so that you get all of the people who have nothing to do because they're on vacation. So I think that was a great move by them. And if it can pass $1.7 billion is the goal, so it passes The Lion King.
We'll certainly be keeping an eye out for that. Yeah. And I'm sure you'll be definitely excited if it does do that to be. So, Nic, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Tell everyone where we can find you on social media and where we can find your podcast.
So, the Nerdiest Podcast, we are on Spotify, Apple, and all the other major podcasting platforms as the Nerdiest Podcast. We're on YouTube, the Nerdiest Podcast, and you can follow us on Instagram I think it's at the Nerdiest Podcast. Let me double check. I don't want to get it wrong. Yes, it's just at the Nerdiest Podcast. So, and we're also on Twitter at Nerdiest Pod if you want to follow, but we really don't use it at all. Like, Jackson will use it every now and then because it's a great meme template format, but that's about it. So if you want to follow us there, great. If not, we don't really use it.
What have you got coming up in your next episode?
Our next episode is, we're doing another episode of Jackson's Anime Adventure. I made him watch Spy Family because that is what our YouTube community tab voted for. So that is our next episode. And then after that, I'm not quite sure. Our May schedules, we're still trying to figure it out, but that's the next one, is Spy Family. So we're looking forward to doing that one.
Nice. Definitely go and give them a listen. They're definitely worth it. I think the two of you have a great dynamic, and it's definitely something that works really well for you guys, and you're definitely successful. You've got plenty of followers. I think for you guys, you're young guys in the game as well. It's only going to go upwards and upwards for you lot. Keep an eye out for him as well, filmmaker. I saw obviously that you won some awards for your short films as well. Yeah. So you must be sort of pleased with how that's going. Are you near the end of sort of your degree at the moment?
So
your course?
I'm graduated. I'm done. Jackson. So technically, the awards are Jackson's, not mine, because it was his film that I helped out with. So I can technically put on my resume, I worked on an award-winning short film. It wasn't mine. But he is currently in school, but I'm done and graduated. So
Nice. Well, I really look forward to seeing what you're coming up with in the future, and obviously I'll still be giving you a podcast to listen. So, thank you so much again for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for everyone to listening to us or watching the video. I'm going to be back next week with a Star Wars May the 4th special. Going to be chatting all things Star Wars, as it's my favourite thing in the world. I think you can probably tell from the lovely collection behind me.
I mean, you haven't been able to see it because of my head, but I have a Japanese Empire Strikes Back poster behind me, and I love it.
I mean, you never get to see it because I'm sort of sat in the way, but I've got sort of like Mandalorian, I've got Vader, sort of all that lovely stuff.
I have a Mandalorian helmet up there that I bought because I love the Mandalorian.
Yeah, it's been a great show, to be fair. So, yeah, next week, that's what I'm going to be talking about. But for the meantime, thank you very much, and I will see you next time.